Hi, and welcome back. I am Nick, and here we are revolutionizing your news with non party affiliated host, me, Nick Casciotti. This is an open platform of discussion. Help us grow by smashing that thumbs up button below. Join the movement, hit the subscribe button, and if you want to participate, put your answers to the topics in the comments below. And now let's hear from our guest. Our first topic today was submitted in one of the comments earlier. In 43 states across the country, Republican lawmakers have proposed at least 250 laws, Rez, that would limit mail, early, in-person, and election day voting, with such constraints as stricter ID requirements, limited hours, narrower eligibility, and voting absentee. Is this necessary, Rez? Does the United States need this new voting regulation right now?
Thank you, Nick, for that question. And I just want to say again, it's a pleasure to be on your show again. So to answer your question in short, no, it is not necessary. But let's get the facts straight first. Fact is that the last presidential election in 2020 was a secure election. President Trump the election was not stolen from President Trump. President Trump lost fair and square. President Joe Biden won the election because of 82 million legal votes casted. I believe there was a statistic that showed in the Washington Post that said 116 million Americans, 73% of the electorate, participated in the last election because they were motivated by what they saw from the people in power. So again, to answer your question, no, these laws are not needed. I do not support these proposals because their aim with these proposals is to restrict Americans from exercising their right to vote. These laws are written in a way to prevent Black and brown Americans from exercising their right to vote. We have seen from this past election, because of mail-in voting, because of early voting, millions of Americans came out to vote. Studies have shown that with elections with a high turnout, Republicans do poorly. Republican policies are not popular, hence why they lose in elections with high turnout. What Republicans are doing now, because of what they saw in 2020, is that they want to win elections with limited turnout, with low turnout. And how they want to do it is by limiting Black and brown Americans from participating in our elections.
Kyle, as a libertarian, you're seeing 250 rules, laws, regulations go through state houses right now. What sign does that what sign does that show to you as a libertarian? Is this good, bad? Is this something that we need right now?
Well, a recurring theme to me is that whoever proposes these laws, typically they try to make those laws benefit them. So while there's going to be some aspects of those laws that people agree with, there's going to be usually there that will help. Rez might have a point where is these laws, maybe they're intentionally, or they're well intentioned, but do they have bad outcomes? Like are we artificially limiting some population from exercising the right to vote? You have to be careful when you propose laws. And this entire conundrum, we have left and right both complaining that the elections are unfair. So I don't know if they actually are unfair, and I don't think anybody knows because there's no true audit on the data. I can't go to my state, give me the millions of votes that were voted, anonymize them, let me look at them, let me make sure they're accounted for. Let me make sure the numbers match up based on registered voters. That data is not given to us.
Austin, that really leads us, as a third party member, right? We're looking at Libertarian Green Party. Do these rules, laws, and regulations hurt or help right now in the status of where the country is?
It took me a second to realize that we were talking about ballots via the postal service and not limiting the voting rights of men because of mail voting. But it's not a surprise to me. The United States is not a democracy. The United States is a two-party dictatorship. We have a current system where many of the people do not feel represented. We have a system where minor party candidates must get X amount of votes to remain on the ballot, whereas they are completely banned from any statewide media outlets. They are not allowed into the debates. They are not allowed equal access to media coverage that we see. And so many people do not feel represented. And we do have a solution to this. It's called ranked choice voting. We've seen it done in many states, and a few states in many cities, to where if you have 4 candidates on the ballot, you rank them 1, 2, 3, 4 in the order in which you like them. So if you like the Green Party candidate, rank Green Party number 1, and then you can rank Democrat number 2. So if nobody receives 50% of the vote in a single district election, your first choice is eliminated, and then your vote goes to choice number 2 until someone receives 50% of the vote, and they just keep going down however many candidates you have. We also need proportional representation that we see in so many countries and so many legislatures around the world, where if a party gets 3% of the vote, you have 3% of the seats in the legislature. So if the Greens get 3%, they get 1 seat. If the Libertarians get 5, they get 2, and so on and so forth. So we do have solutions to these modern problems, but the current 2-party dictatorship in controlling the United States will not see that to come into fruition.
Rocco, there's 250 rules, laws, and regulations that are being proposed through state legislatures to limit or to transform mail-in ballots, mail-in voting, in-person voting. Is this something that the United States needs right now?
Yes, this is absolutely something that we need, because these measures, such as voter ID, such as limiting mail-in voting, such as limiting the window of time in which people can vote, is designed to ensure that the people who are voting are citizens, that the people who are being said to have been voted are actually the ones who are voting, and that there aren't people going door-to-door ballot harvesting in an attempt to have an outsized influence on the election via turning out voters who were not genuinely interested in voting. And that's the real contention here. We saw insane voter turnout in the 2020 election, particularly in the 5 major counties in the big states, which Donald Trump lost by a small margin. And this was in the aftermath of many law changes at the last minute in these states, or in some cases in the state of Pennsylvania, for example, changes by state executives which didn't come with a change to the actual law by the state legislature at all. And now Republicans are correctly understanding the danger of allowing this sort of reckless ballot harvesting to continue. The left will contend that this is about race, which of course relies on the fundamentally racist notion that minorities are inherently less capable of getting an ID. I mean, just to highlight the insanity, my mom got her COVID vaccine today, and she had to present an ID to do it, to get a vaccine to save her life. But she didn't have to do so in order to vote. In New York, this is a very clear voter fraud scheme, as you can register to vote using a driver's license number in my state rather than your actual voter ID. And illegal immigrants can get driver's licenses in this state. Therefore, with the mere signature saying that they're citizens, they can become registered voters. Voter integrity is a real issue. We're talking about a Democratic Party who wishes to expand the mail-in voting system, where the chain of custody starts with a Democratic postal workers union who endorsed Joe Biden. And we have every right to be skeptical. And frankly, just to wrap up, it's highly cynical the way the left is attempting to lower the average quality of the voter in attempts to win elections using low information voters. That's what this is really all about. Make voting easier in some high density locations so they can leverage low cost voting to get a ton of votes from politically non-initiated people. These measures are aimed at making sure that the people who are voting are the ones who actually have a stake in the game, who've actually been informed on the issue, aren't just being approached by some community activist and being accosted to sign a ballot that they didn't really want to sign or don't really care about.
Rez, I'm going to let you respond.
Yeah, so a lot of Rocco's arguments are based on false premises. Number one, there was no widespread voter fraud in the last election. So this idea that we need to secure an election for what? There was no widespread voter fraud. Number two, statistically, it shows that voter ID laws disproportionately affect people of color. It is disproportionately affects poor voters and Black and brown voters. And that's why Republicans are pushing these voter ID laws to limit voting from Black and brown communities. Number three, mail-in voting was done because we were living in a global pandemic. And even with mail-in voting, there was no voter fraud. There was no voter harvesting. Americans have the right to vote. It is not up to Rocco. It is not up to me to decide whether or not they are educated or uneducated voters, whether or not they are interested enough to vote. If they want to vote, they should be able to vote. What this is that Republican policies are unpopular. Majority of Americans do not support Republican policies. Elections with high turnout often results in Republicans losing elections. But rather than the Republican Party trying to expand their voter base to get more black and brown voters, they want to limit black and brown voters. What Republicans are supporting now with these new voting restrictions is the new Jim Crow. And that is what my friend Rocco is arguing for, the new Jim Crow.
I'm going to let Rocco respond. I mean, there's a lot of heavy packaging to unpack there, but I do think that this definitely has a big representation scenario for Kyle and Austin, adding these 250 new laws, rules, and regulations when it does come to limiting voting requirements and the sorts. So, Kyle, how do you respond to Rez and Rocco's points?
Not much to add other than to say there's no voter fraud is ridiculous. There's voter fraud every single voting election. That's the proportionality you're arguing.
But
that's true. That's what was deemed by the courts. There was no, but we can't
because the courts
it.
looked
Basically
at the
going to a priest and saying, "Hey, did you talk to God? What did God say?" Well, God said there was no voter fraud. Well, of course God's going to say that. You're a priest.
Well, no. If there was widespread voter fraud, there would be evidence, but there wasn't. Like, these arguments are based on a false premise.
That's what I want people to understand. No one has the data, so that's why both left and right have. I mean, Hillary Clinton complained about the election.
You can audit the data if you like. You have to pay for it, and that's what they did. They hand counted the votes in Georgia. They looked into the data in Pennsylvania and Michigan. They couldn't find any. When you bring something to the courts, Kyle, you need evidence. You can't just run on conspiracy.
So disclose that data to the general population. Why isn't that available?
Hold on, guys.
Where's their data?
I need Austin to weigh in. Austin, I mean, realistically, we're talking Green Party here. We're looking at these rules, laws, and regulations. I mean, is this adding these into state legislatures right now? Is that going to help people get, expand their horizons into Libertarian, into Green Party? Will that help?
I'm not too terribly concerned about 100 or 200 accounts of voter fraud every single election when the system is rigged for those who want to win. We have a system in the United States that is so vastly polarized that we can't even fathom opposition voices and opposition choices. You know who the #1 group of mail-in voters are? American soldiers abroad. And to attempt to limit those attempts of voting and that type of access to the democratic system is an attempt to limit those people who conservatives and liberals love to send abroad to die for wars for oil, but they can't participate in the democracy that they are attempting to fight and die for. It's absolutely unfathomable to me. The other group of people who have access to voting by mail are elderly people in nursing homes, those people who physically can't go out and participate in direct democracy. They deserve a voice and a choice as well. Stay-at-home mothers who have ailing children who can't take time off. The workers who have been exploited under the capitalist system to where they cannot even take an hour off. Voting is not a national holiday. Those who are wage slaves to the current capitalist system cannot take a day, an hour, 2 hours off and go vote when you have a ruling bourgeoisie democracy that would rather...
Austin, I mean, I want to bring up a counterpoint. I mean, there's a lot of apps out there, banking apps, that use two-factor authentication to authenticate who you are. They're not just taking you at your face value. So we're talking about Bank of America, Chase. I mean, all these multinational companies right now have these security protocols in place. Is that something that our election needs by also requiring some type of identification or not?
Well, I can't speak for most states, but during the 2018 primaries, I was living in South Korea and I had voted abroad during the primaries. And the hoops you had to jump through in order to vote for abroad for a party primary, such as minuscule as the Green Party, was immense. My voter ballot fee to send, because I was living in a rural part of South Korea, to send it to rural Ohio, the shipping fee was almost $40. That's something people in the United States do not have to pay. I had to prove my identity. I had to use my social security number for proof of ballot, and then I was only given a week to return it from the other side of the world. So it's not such an easy process as in putting it into an envelope and sending it off onto its way.
I want Rocco to finish this out, but Rez, I really like that question, that counterpoint that I brought up, that we do have ways of proving, to keeping your banking secure and whatnot. Should your vote be secure? I mean, that's really what I'm reading into the question. It looks like they want some type of security measures. Is that what you're getting out of it?
Yeah, so I'm authenticated as a voter when I sign up for voter registration. When I sign up to go through a voter registration, you are already authenticated. Number one. Number two, if we're going to require voters to have an ID, then the state should pay for all of those identifications and mail all of those identifications to every single eligible voter in a state. But they don't do that. They expect you to pay for your ID. And what this does is that it disproportionately, these are studies that have cited this, disproportionately targets Black and brown voters, poor voters. Again, there is no widespread voter fraud. Voter fraud is largely a myth. No one no one cares about elections enough to go vote twice. Matter in fact, in the 2016 election, there were Trump supporters who voted twice. And also in the 2020 election, the few cases of voter fraud were by Trump supporters, but it wasn't enough to make a difference. Like I said, there's no widespread voter fraud. Voter fraud is largely a myth, but it's used by Republicans to limit access to the voting polls.
Okay, Rocco, I'm going to let you round us out.
Yeah, so I think that I first have to just address the question of voter fraud really quick. I mean, just a few examples of voter fraud or voter irregularities. You did not need a voter ID in the state of Georgia to mail in a mail-in vote. You heard me right. You did not need any sort of ID to mail in a mail-in vote in the state of Georgia.
And that's perfectly fine.
Mail-in votes, on mail-in votes in the state of Pennsylvania, poll watchers were not allowed the opportunity to verify mail-in votes in certain counties. And when it was taken to the courts, it was told to them that this was not something that had impacted the election yet, and therefore they didn't have any standing. In Fulton County, they kicked out poll watchers, or let me excuse myself. They told poll watchers that the counting of ballots was ending because there had been a pipe burst in the arena. And then as poll watchers left, in the aftermath, people came in and continued to count ballots. Now, these are just examples. And another one in the state of Wisconsin, tens of thousands of ballots came in, which were absentee ballots, which had only a name and no address on them. And these ballots would have historically been thrown out. Rand Paul famously brought this up on ABC with George Stephanopoulos. So the idea that these are simply baseless accusations, that they are simply conspiracy theories, is essentially a product of having not looked into the issue seriously. The fact is that there are real questions about voter fraud. But even if you don't believe in voter fraud, really my argument is that the left attempted to intentionally manipulate the rules in a manner which was to leverage low-cost voting in order to win an election. We know for a fact.
Where is the left? The Democratic Party is not a left party. The Communist Party has been not active since 1980. Where is the left that you speak of all the time? Where is it?
Well, here's
Socialist Party is only active in 2 states. Where's the left? The left starts at anti-capitalism. If you're not anti-capitalist, you're not left.
Let him
finish. Rocco, go ahead, please.
My point being that, I'll just wrap up by saying this and reiterating that to get a vaccine for the COVID pandemic that the Democrats used to justify all these voting changes which made this election more based on mail-in voting and absentee voting, which Democrats tend to do better in, where Republicans, and early voting, I should say, things Democrats tend to do better in, where Republicans tend to do better in person on election day. If these had been normal rules, then Donald Trump would have won in a landslide, and we all know that. But the rules were changed at the last minute in a manner which impacted the race so that Joe Biden barely eked out this race by 40,000 votes in 3 states. And even if you take the voter fraud question out of it, the fact that they changed all these rules at the last minute in a way that we know historically benefits Democrats with the mail-in, the absentee, the early voting, and was to the disadvantage of Republicans by making the in-person vote on election day therefore less important, we know that had a major impact, and Republicans have every reason to push back on that.
we need to end it right there. We appreciate you joining us today. Thank you to our guests, and we will see you in the next one. Take care. Thanks, guys. Bye.